My name is Reuben Keehan, and I'm speaking to you from Turrbal and Yagara country, from the banks of the beautiful Maiwar, the river that runs through Brisbane, where I'm Curator, Contemporary Asian Art at the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and water I speak to you from, and pay my respects to elders here and in your community, and extend a special welcome to all First Nations people listening. I'm also one of the curators responsible for the 10th Asia Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art, or APT10, which is currently on display at Quagoma. The exhibition runs until the 25th of April, and our borders are finally open, so I welcome you to come and see it for yourself while enjoying everything this beautiful part of the world has to offer. The APT is the only exhibition of its kind to survey the art of Asia, Australia, and the Pacific, from a location at the meeting point of the world's largest and most populous continent and greatest and deepest ocean. If there is an overarching theme to the APT, it is, as the series name suggests, the art of a specific geography and time frame. Each edition of the APT operates not in isolation, but in a continuum, informed less by a single preoccupation of artistic direction than by sustained dialogue through a dedicated team of researchers. These guidelines are not necessarily fixed. Interpretations of what constitutes the project's continental, oceanic, and temporal frameworks have shifted productively over the course of its existence. But they do imply a continuity of focus and exhibition form. As such, the basic structure of APT10 echoes that of previous editions, a large-scale, museum-based triennial organised by an in-house curatorial team with support from across the institution. Significantly, this edition further advances two trends that have been underway within the triennial for some time. The first is incorporating the expanded community that's so vital to the development of APT into the structure of the project itself. The second is recognising the increasing significance of Indigenous, First Nations, and minority practitioners in debates around contemporary art across the region. Often, these aims have been undertaken in tandem. With these methodologies in mind, I'd like to introduce you to some of the works and projects in APT10. I'll particularly focus on the ideas of space and time and what they mean for thinking about the part of the world we inhabit and what that means for the idea of contemporary art. The exhibition opens with a suite of works that introduce some of the major preoccupations for artists working in the region. Kuwaiti artist Alia Farid's oversized fiberglass water containers dominate the entry to the space, proposing different ways people treat, transport, and consume water, from respectfully carried sacred liquid to environmentally harmful disposable plastic containers. At the opposite end of the room is Fijian-Australian artist Saloti Tawali's 15-metre-long bamboo recreation of a traditional Fijian raft known as a billy-billy, conceived to inhabit a fluid space between the two lands the artist calls home. Facing off in the centre of the space are two immense wall-based works by Malaysia's Chong Kim Chu and Archioklos from the Philippines. With his compulsively scrambled maps painted directly onto tarpaulin, Chong challenges impositions of colonial and political borders and the aesthetic manifestations of the idea of nationality. Working on rice sacks, Oklos shows a dramatic procession of the dispossessed, featuring individuals from different cultural and religious groups, including Philippines Indigenous peoples, all of whom have been forced to become immigrants in their own nation. Archioklos' decision to paint on rice sacks adds extra layers of meaning to this work, but it's also a direct response to the conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a mural painter, Oklos was one of a number of artists initially invited to produce site-specific or performance-based work for APT, whose plans had to be altered in the light of travel restrictions. We've also noted the impact of the pandemic in other ways at the levels of artists' work. In the past 2 years, human movement has taken on new connotations, provoking the question of how we can now meaningfully connect, given the centrality of migration experiences to artists in the Asia-Pacific. Similarly, the spaces we inhabit, those we've come from and those we dream of, have taken on a heightened relevance, with profound effects on livelihoods and artistic production. This is evident across the exhibition, in Shubigi Rao's recordings of birdsong made by her family members stranded in 4 different cities around the world and shared on WhatsApp. In Yuji's sculptural embodiments of the domestic rhythms of eating, sleeping, and cleaning. In Nguyen Phong Lin's reflection on the demolition of the home she was raised in. Or in Samakshi Singh's recreation of architectural features from her grandmother's house in thread. Aspects of how we navigate and express our place in the world, and the influence of past encounters that hold meaning today, are embedded in objects, language, teaching, and song that carry knowledge across communities and through generations. The artists and collaborators in APT10 draw on deep histories, current urgencies, and cultural encounters, both friendly and otherwise, that have shaped art and life across the Asia-Pacific and which take on heightened relevance as we try to imagine a new future together. For some artists, this means retrieving and reinvigorating the stories, techniques, and languages of their elders and ancestors, as in Yi Ilan's karaoke mat, made with weavers from her grandmother's community in the mountains of Borneo, spelling out song lyrics in the disappearing Dusun language. For others, this means exploring effaced histories of contact and confrontation that have shaped the current landscape of the Asia-Pacific. Hao Jingban's excavation of cinema histories in Manchuria, for example. Minho Klim, tracing the evolution of a German folk tune from a Christmas carol to a revolutionary workers' song to anthems of opposing meaning in Korea. Som Supaparinya's study of sites of resistance in post-war Thailand. Taiwan figures twice in this body of work, first in Xu Jiaowei's high-tech narratives of transnational colonial encounters across Southeast Asia, and again in Hikaru Fuji's interpretation of colonial-era Japanization exercises by present-day Vietnamese students living in Japan. Within its broader contingent of 69 projects by some 150 artists, APT10 features 4 co-curated sections that unite multiple practitioners and have been produced with partner organisations and the contribution of co-curators. The Air Canoe project focuses on the Northern Oceanian region of islands and atolls known as Central Micronesia. The project reclaims Indigenous Islander peoples' connections to and relationships with water, land, and skies, as well as to the past, present, and future through contemporary artistic reworkings of culture, history, and technology, and responds to the ongoing history of military and colonial domination in a region where the air itself is colonised. Urumat Mugas, or Urumat Story Songs, is a collaborative project inspired by the dynamic ceremonial practices of the Urumat families of East New Britain in Papua New Guinea. Working with local videographers and artists, as well as staff from Quigoma and the Queensland University of Technology, the community developed an immersive installation in which ceremonial objects of spiritual entities return virtually to place via the recorded sounds of Urumat songs, the mesmerising beats of their bamboo orchestra, and the sights and sounds of village life. The Yolngu Macassan project illustrates the historic, cultural, social and spiritual connection between the saltwater Yolngu people of northeastern Arnhem Land and the Macassan and Bugis boat builders, traders and fishers of South Sulawesi in Indonesia, a relationship that predates the arrival of Europeans in Australia. Works by Yolngu and Macassan artists include woven sails, bark paintings with Macassan references, a collection of ceramic pots made in Makassar and painted by Yolngu people, a video performance by Macassan artist Abdi Karya, and a large group of Larrakitch memorial poles installed in a configuration reminiscent of a Macassan boat. Co-curated by Itan Pavavalong and Man Ray Shu, and produced in collaboration with the Taiwan Indigenous Peoples Cultural Development Centre, Between Earth and Sky explores the land, ecology and cosmology through a cross-generational selection of 8 Taiwanese Indigenous artists working in painting, sculpture, textiles, ceramics, installation and performance. The contemporary art of Taiwan's Indigenous people is a rich and expanding field, characterised by its diversity, its aesthetic innovation, which is grounded in the retrieval of effaced culture, and a real desire to engage with the problems of the present, including the awesome threats posed by climate change and habitat destruction, from the perspective of Indigenous wisdom. Drawing on the history, cosmology and mythos of Taiwan's Indigenous peoples, Between Earth and Sky accordingly reflects on possible future relationships between humans, the land and other species that inhabit it. Within the context of APT, it provides an introduction to the breadth and richness of the field of practice, and it proposes further connections with Indigenous and non-Indigenous practice throughout the region. These connections play productively across the exhibition. For instance, Alawai Kalmakan and Yuma Taru's reworking of Paiwan and Atayal weaving practices into large-scale installation are echoed in the next room. Here, we presented 6 brightly coloured mats depicting the maritime daily life of women from the Bajau Summer Delaut community in eastern Borneo, alongside a woven body sculpture by Grace Lillian Lee of the Meriam Mer people in Queensland Torres Strait Islands. Creation stories and myths that are explored in the work of Itan Pavavalong and Ruby Swana find complement in the immense painting projects of Mayur and Tushar Vaida of India's Indigenous Warli people, and narrative paintings on suspended copper by Philippines artist Lee Pahe. The celebration and preservation of cultural expressions by Anli Ganu and Masiswaga Zingru is echoed in dynamic Nasalite pottery from Fiji, coconut fibre motikaka weaving by Tonga's Leseli Topu and Sione Mailaseni, and a dramatic installation of lacquer paintings by Vietnam's Phi On. Meanwhile, the Indigenous punk choreography of Fungus Nao and the cross-cultural, cross-gender shamanic performance of Don Don Hunwen find a critical and speculative counterpart in the Indigenous futurism of Subhash Debalimbu of Nepal's Yaktung people, expressed in the epic science fiction film Umasum. Questions of what the future might look like, and more fundamentally, who will participate in creating it, are closely related to the idea of the contemporary that's used across APT 10. In seeking to broaden ideas of what might constitute contemporary art, we try to work from a conception of the contemporary not as a genre that represents the culmination of a particular modernism, but in the literal sense of at the same time, the time we inhabit together, all at once, and through which we navigate. The Maori proverb, kamua kamuri, meaning to walk backwards into the future, is a conceptual framework for Shannon Tao's video installation, and an idea that resounds through projects in APT 10 as artists reimagine their histories and cultures for new generations. This is a fervent motivation for Wānyi artist Gordon Hookie's epic paintings, made on the Aboriginal lands in and around where APT 10 takes place, which present a broad story of creation and history in a way that asks how, who, and for what reasons such histories were written. So, to future strategies. The Asia-Pacific Triennial is not just an exhibition, it's a series of exhibitions, forums and exchanges. It's a catalyst and a hub for connections between communities across this vast and diverse region that we share. The Australian Centre for Asian and Pacific Art, or ACAPA, which is the Triennial's research arm, provides a framework for further initiatives that broaden the community involved in the APT in focused and meaningful ways. The ACAPA Community Engagement Project, or ACE, co-created with a group of 10 dynamic young Pacific Islanders, specifically platforms the knowledge and values of Pacific communities in southeast Queensland. In addition, APT10 has played host to the inaugural Creative New Zealand Pacific Curator Residency with Auckland-based artist and curator Natasha Matila-Smith, who's curated the Christina Pataili presentation on the left. And it also includes learning initiatives driven by our artist in residence, Brian Fuata, performing on the right. An interlocutor program gathers an expert group of artists, curators and researchers from across Asia, the Pacific and Australia who provide advice, share knowledge and help increase cultural understanding. ACAPA seeks to capture these currents of practice within the region, not only through our exhibition catalogues, but also through the Asia Pacific Art Papers website, a digital publication featuring a wealth of commissioned texts, exploring the unique conditions and contexts for cultural production in the Asia Pacific. Furthermore, we're in the midst of All Apart, a program of online forums produced in collaboration with AsiaLink and the Griffith Asia Institute, with many more public events, including a closing weekend festival still to come. Together, these initiatives seek to add porosity of voices, recognise multiplicities, and build on the APT's continued and sustained engagement, understanding and participation in the contemporary culture of our region. The experience of being separated, of working remotely, of realising and installing projects without artist presence has been a difficult one, particularly for a platform with such a strong record of bringing diverse communities together, building new solidarities and bringing attention to long-standing ones. It was hard not to celebrate with my artists on opening night, to see them meet each other and make their own connections for the future. But I do believe we'll emerge with stronger bonds. And until we see each other again, I thank you for your time.